The morning alarm screamed through the cramped apartment like a banshee, jerking from another restless night. He rolled over, checking the cracked display on his bedside clock. 6:30. Another day at the shipyard awaited him, another 16 hours of welding hull plates and pretending the war never happened. Sat up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his left shoulder where shrapnel had torn through his armor during the Battle of Station. The doctors said he was lucky. Lucky to be alive, lucky to have both arms, lucky the neural damage wasn't worse. He didn't feel lucky. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. The apartment was barely large enough for one person, with peeling paint and a ventilation system that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. But it was what he could afford on a shipyard worker's salary. The government pension helped, though not much. Apparently, saving an entire alien species from extinction only earned you a modest monthly check and a form letter thanking you for your service. Shuffled to the tiny kitchen, brewing coffee from synthetic beans that tasted like burnt cardboard. Outside his single window, New Geneva stretched toward the horizon, a sprawling maze of concrete and steel towers reaching toward a gray sky. Somewhere out there, in the wealthy districts, politicians and corporate executives lived in mansions built with profits from the war. They gave speeches about unity and sacrifice while counted coins to buy groceries. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling his apartment with the only pleasant sound he'd hear all day. Stared at his reflection in the black window, seeing a man 10 years older than his actual age. The war had done that to him, carved lines around his eyes and turned his brown hair prematurely gray at the temples. His friends said he looked distinguished, thought he looked tired. A soft chime from his communication device interrupted his brooding. Frowned, checking the display. It was barely 7 in the morning. Who would be calling this early? The caller identification showed only a string of numbers he didn't recognize, with a location tag marking it as coming from the outer colonies. "Hello," answered cautiously. Static crackled through the speaker, followed by a voice speaking in a language he hadn't heard in 5 years. The melodic, flowing syllables have made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Had learned the language during the war, spending months embedded with resistance fighters as they fought against the hegemony occupation of there. Is this, formerly of the Terran Colonial Marines, 3rd Special Operations Division? The voice spoke in heavily accented English, each word carefully pronounced. Set down his coffee cup with trembling fingers. Who is this? My name is, I served as communications liaison with your unit during the liberation of Prime. You probably don't remember me. But did remember. How could he forget the young female who had risked her life daily to coordinate between human forces and the underground resistance? She had been barely more than a teenager then, all wide golden eyes and nervous energy, her fox-like ears constantly swiveling as she listened for approaching hegemony patrols. I remember you, said quietly. What happened? Are you all right? A long pause filled the silence. When spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made stomach clench with dread. I need your help. Something terrible has happened on Prime. The hegemony. They've returned. Nearly dropped the communication device. That's impossible. We destroyed their fleet. The surrender was unconditional. Not the main hegemony forces, explained. A splinter group calling themselves the Iron Fang Collective. They have new technology, new weapons. They've conquered half our star system in the past 3 months. Our government, our military, they've fallen. The coffee and stomach turned to acid. He closed his eyes, remembering the devastation the hegemony had wrought on Prime during the original occupation. Entire cities burned to ash, millions of enslaved or murdered, their beautiful forests stripped bare to fuel the hegemony war machine. The thought of it happening again made him feel sick. What about the Colonial Defense Force? Asked. The treaty of guarantees mutual defense if Prime is under attack. The colonial government claims the Iron Fang Collective is not technically part of the hegemony, interrupted, bitterness creeping into her voice. They say it's an internal matter. They won't intervene. Cursed under his breath. Politics. Even with an entire species facing extinction, the bureaucrats still played their games. He could picture the emergency sessions, the carefully worded statements, the classified reports explaining why intervention wasn't feasible at this time. Why are you calling me? Asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. I'm nobody special, just another broken soldier trying to pay rent. You're not nobody, said fiercely. You're the human who led the assault on the Hegemony Command Center. You're the one who broke their encryption and gave us access to their battle plans. You saved my world once before. I'm hopping. I'm praying. You might help save it again. Walked to his window, staring out at the endless urban sprawl. Somewhere in those concrete towers, other veterans were probably having similar conversations. Some would hang up, citing family obligations or medical conditions. Others would simply refuse to get involved, having given enough of themselves already. I don't have a ship, said finally. I don't have weapons or equipment. I'm one man with a bad shoulder and a civilian job. What exactly do you think I can do? I've managed to acquire a ship, replied. Nothing fancy, just a converted cargo hauler with basic defensive systems. As for weapons, we'll have to make do with what we can find. But I'm not asking you to fight an entire war by yourself. I'm asking you to help me reach the resistance groups that are still holding out, to coordinate their efforts, to give them hope. Closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He thought about his comfortable routine, his steady paycheck, his quiet apartment where nobody shot at him or expected him to make life-or-death decisions. He thought about the pension he'd lose if he left Earth without authorization, the job he'd never get back. Then he thought about, 19 years old and terrified, crouched in a bombed-out building as she relayed coordinates to human artillery units. He remembered her tears when they'd found her village burned to the ground, her family among the casualties. He remembered promising her that the war was over, that her people would be free. "Where do you need me to meet you?" asked. Relief flooded through his voice. "There's a freight station on Luna, docking bay 7. I'll be waiting there with the ship. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," warned. "We might both be dead in a week." "Better to die fighting for something that matters than to live safely for nothing at all," replied. "I learned that from a human soldier 5 years ago." After ending the call, stood motionless for several minutes. Then he began pulling clothes from his closet, stuffing them into an old military duffel bag. At the bottom of his closet, wrapped in an oil-stained cloth, lay his service sidearm. Hesitated before picking it up, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon in his hands. He called in sick to work, citing a family emergency. Not technically a lie, he reasoned. They had fought alongside humanity during the darkest days of the war. If that didn't make them family, nothing did. The transit shuttle to Luna left at noon. Bought a one-way ticket with his credit account, draining most of his savings. If they succeeded in reaching Prime, money would be the least of his concerns. If they failed, well, he wouldn't need money where he was going. As the shuttle lifted away from Earth's surface, watched the blue-green planet shrink beneath him. He'd always planned to die on Earth, in some hospital bed surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the quiet beeping of medical equipment. Instead, it looked like he'd die among the stars, fighting beside aliens he'd grown to love more than his own species. The irony wasn't lost on him. Who'd spent 5 years trying to forget the war, was about to start another one. Luna's freight district buzzed with activity as cargo haulers and commercial transports loaded supplies for the outer colonies. Made his way through the crowded corridors, following directional signs toward the docking bays. The artificial gravity felt lighter here than on Earth, making each step feel like he might float away. Docking Bay 7 housed a ship that had definitely seen better days. The vessel was roughly the size of a small apartment building, its hull with the telltale marks of micrometeorite impacts and hard use. Faded lettering along the side read, "Silent Runner," though someone had painted over the original registration numbers with fresh black paint. Standing beside the ship's cargo ramp, saw a figure he almost didn't recognize. Had grown taller in the 5 years since the war, her adolescent awkwardness replaced by the lean grace of an adult. Her russet fur had darkened to a deep auburn, and her golden eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. She wore practical civilian clothes, dark pants, a heavy jacket, and sturdy boots designed for shipboard life. But when she saw approaching, her ears perked up in the distinctly expression of joy, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young translator who had shared rations with him in muddy foxholes. "You came," she said simply. "I gave my word," replied. 5 years ago I promised your people would be free. Seems like I need to keep that promise." His eyes glistened with unshed tears. She stepped forward hesitantly, then threw her arms around in a fierce embrace. Her fur was incredibly soft, and she smelled like cinnamon and starlight, a scent he remembered from countless nights spent planning raids against hegemony positions. I was so afraid you'd say no, she whispered against his shoulder. So afraid you'd think it was hopeless. Gently extracted himself from the embrace, studying her face. It probably is hopeless, but that's never stopped humans before. Laughed, a sound like silver bells in a winter wind. No, it hasn't. Come, let me show you our ship. She's not much to look at, but she'll get us where we need to go. The silent runner's interior was cramped but functional, with narrow corridors connecting the bridge, crew quarters, cargo bay, and engine room. Everything was painted in neutral grays and browns, giving the ship the atmosphere of a utilitarian workplace rather than a home. I bought her from a smuggler on Titan, explained as they toured the vessel. She's fast, reasonably reliable, and her registration papers won't hold up to serious scrutiny, perfect for our needs. The bridge was barely large enough for 2 people, with pilot and co-pilot stations facing a main currently displaying Luna's industrial landscape. Settled into the co-pilot's chair, running his hands over controls he hadn't touched in 5 years. The layout was similar to military vessels, though for civilian use. How long to reach Prime? Asked. 2 weeks through hyperspace, assuming we don't run into patrol ships, replied. The Iron Fang Collective has blockaded the main shipping lanes, but I know some routes the Resistance uses. Nodded, already thinking tactically. 2 weeks would give them time to plan, to study whatever intelligence had gathered about the enemy forces. It would also give him time to remember skills he'd tried hard to forget. Tell me about the Iron Fang Collective, said. Numbers, equipment, leadership structure, everything you know. His expression darkened. They're led by someone calling himself the Crimson General. Nobody knows his real name or species, but he's smart and ruthless. His forces hit our outer colonies first, taking them before our government could react. By the time we realized what was happening, they controlled 3 star systems. She activated a holographic display showing the star cluster. Red markers indicated Iron Fang positions, while green dots marked the few remaining free territories. They have at least 50 capital ships, plus support vessels and ground forces, continued. Their technology is advanced, possibly beyond what the original hegemony possessed. Energy weapons that can punch through our strongest shields, fighters faster than anything in our fleet. Studied the tactical display, noting the strategic positions of enemy forces. What about the Resistance? How many groups are still active? Maybe 20 cells scattered across 6 worlds, admitted. They're brave, but they lack coordination and supplies. Most are barely holding their ground, let alone mounting counterattacks. And you think one human can change that? Asked, raising an eyebrow. I think one human who helped plan the liberation of Station might have some ideas, replied with a slight smile. Besides, you won't be alone. I've been in contact with several resistance leaders. They remember what human special forces accomplished during the war. They're willing to listen. Leaned back in the co-pilot's chair, feeling the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders. During the war, he'd commanded a full company of Marines plus supporting units. Now he was one man with a borrowed ship and fatting memories of tactics that might not apply to current circumstances. But as he looked at its hopeful expression, realized it didn't matter. Sometimes the only choice was to try, regardless of the odds. The hyperspace journey to Prime stretched ahead like a tunnel through eternity. Spent the first 3 days reacquainting himself with ship operations, studying the silent runners' systems, and helping plot their approach route. The cargo hauler might look unremarkable, but she'd been modified with military-grade sensors and communication equipment. The previous owner was definitely more than just a smuggler, observed, examining the sensor array's specifications. This equipment could track fleet movements across half a star system. Nodded grimly. Captain Reeves sold it to me cheap because the Colonial Defense Force was asking too many questions about his activities. He was happy to disappear into the outer rim with a new identity. As the days passed, watched transform from the nervous translator, he remembered into someone harder and more focused. She moved through the ship with quiet efficiency, checking systems, and monitoring communications with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to life-or-death responsibility. You've changed, told her one evening as they shared dinner in the ship's tiny galley. You're not the scared kid I knew during the war. His ears flattened slightly against her head. 5 years of watching my people struggle to rebuild only to have it all threatened again tends to age someone quickly. Studied her face, nodding the tension around her eyes. What aren't you telling me? There's something else going on here. Was quiet for a long moment, stirring her food without eating. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The Iron Fang Collective isn't just conquering our worlds. They're taking our people. Specifically, they're taking young females for some kind of breeding program. Felt ice form in his stomach. Breeding program. The Crimson General believes he can create a superior warrior race by combining genetics with other species. He's been collecting females from every world he conquers. His hands shook slightly as she spoke. My younger sister Ra was on minor when it fell. I haven't heard from her since. The full scope of desperation suddenly made sense too. This wasn't just about saving her, it was about saving her family. Why didn't you tell me this before? Asked gently. Because I was afraid you'd think I was being selfish, replied. That you'd refuse to help if you knew I had personal motivations. Reached across the small table and placed his hand over hers. Personal motivations are the only ones that matter when you're asking someone to risk their life. I wouldn't trust anyone who didn't have something personal at stake. Relief flooded across Vulpine features. Thank you for understanding. Tell me about your sister, said. What was she like? A sad smile crossed muzzle. Ra is everything I'm not. Beautiful, graceful, charming. She could talk her way out of any trouble, convince anyone to do almost anything. During the war, she was too young to fight, but she helped coordinate supply lines for the resistance. She has this gift for making people trust her instantly. Could hear the love and worry in his voice. We'll find her, he promised, whatever it takes. The next morning, began implementing a training routine he'd developed during the war for working with alien resistance fighters. He started teaching advanced combat techniques, using the ship's cargo bay as a makeshift gymnasium. Human military doctrine emphasizes adaptability and improvisation, explained as he showed her how to disarm an opponent with a knife. We assume the enemy will have better equipment and more resources. Our advantage comes from thinking differently than they do. Was a quick learner, her natural agility and reflexes adapting well to human fighting techniques, but could see she was holding back, reluctant to fully commit to the violent movements. You're thinking too much, told her after she hesitated during a grappling exercise. In combat, hesitation gets you killed. You have to trust your instincts. It's hard, admitted. Culture emphasizes harmony and consensus. We're not naturally aggressive. That's actually an advantage, explained. Your enemies will underestimate you because they expect to be passive. Use that assumption against them. As they practiced, found himself remembering why he'd enjoyed working with forces during the war. They approached problems differently than humans, seeing solutions that escaped more militaristic minds. Their emphasis on stealth and misdirection complemented human direct-action tactics perfectly. On the 8th day of their journey, the ship's communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. Rushed to the bridge, close behind her. This is base calling Silent Runner, a gravelly voice spoke through heavy static. Respond if you can hear this message. Grabbed the communication handset. Base, this is Silent Runner, reading you clearly. Bless stars, we thought you were dead. Where are you? En route to the home system with a friend, replied carefully. What's the situation there? A long pause filled the channel. When the voice returned, it carried grim news. Bad and getting worse. The Iron Fang hit 3 more settlements last week, took everyone between 16 and 30 years old. The government's talking about surrender. Leaned toward the microphone. This is, formerly of the Terran Colonial Marines. Who am I speaking with? Another pause, this one filled with surprise. The human who broke the siege of Station. The same, I need intelligence on Iron Fang positions and strength. Can you provide that? Some, but you should know they have humans working for them now. Mercenaries mostly, but some former Colonial Defense Force personnel. They know our old tactics. Felt his jaw tighten. Humans serving with the Iron Fang Collective meant this conflict was more complicated than a simple alien invasion. It meant politics, money, and the kind of moral ambiguity that made wars drag on for decades. How many humans? Asked. Maybe 500 across all their forces. Not many, but they're in command positions. The Crimson General seems to value human strategic thinking. Understood, keep this channel open if possible. We'll be in system in 6 days. After signing off, stared at the star chart display. thinking through the implications of human involvement with the Iron Fang forces. Mercenaries would fight for money, but ex-military personnel suggested deeper motivations. Why would humans work for them? Asked, voicing his thoughts. Lots of reasons, replied grimly. Some for money, some because they're angry at the colonial government, some because they genuinely believe the Iron Fang represents a better future. The why doesn't matter as much as the fact that they'll know how we think and how we fight. Over the next 3 days, more intelligence trickled in through resistance communications. The Iron Fang Collective had established major bases on 4 worlds in the system, with their primary command center on Prime itself. They controlled the orbital space around every inhabited planet, making direct assault virtually impossible. But began to see patterns in their deployment that suggested weaknesses. The Iron Fang relied heavily on mobility and shock tactics, keeping their forces dispersed to avoid presenting a single target. That dispersal also meant they couldn't concentrate overwhelming force against determined resistance. They're fighting like pirates, not conquerors, explained to as they studied the enemy positions. Hit hard, take what they want, move on to the next target. It's effective for raids but vulnerable to coordinated counterattacks. The resistance groups don't have enough coordination, pointed out. Each cell operates independently. They don't trust each other enough for joint operations. Then we'll have to earn that trust, said, one group at a time. On the 12th day, the silent runner dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Immediately, the ship's sensors detected multiple patrol vessels sweeping the outer planets, engaged the ship's stealth systems, reducing their electromagnetic signature to barely above background levels. Iron Fang destroyer bearing 27 Mark IV, reported, watching her sensors. Range, 50,000 kilometers and closing. Studied the tactical display. The destroyer was following a predictable search pattern, checking each asteroid and debris field for hidden ships. If they maintained their current course, it would pass within 5,000 kilometers of their position. Options asked. We could try to hide in that asteroid field, suggested, pointing to a cluster of rocks ahead of them. Or we could change course and take the long way around. Shook his head. Both those options waste time, and time is something the Resistance doesn't have. How good are this ship's weapons? 2 plasma cannons and a missile launcher, but that destroyer outguns us 10-1. It also outweighs us 50-1, pointed out. In atmosphere, size is an advantage. In space, sometimes it's a liability. Activated the ship's targeting system, studying the destroyer's profile. Like most Iron Fang vessels, it was built for intimidation as much as combat massive engines, heavily armored hull, weapons arrays designed to devastate planetary defenses. But all that mass meant it couldn't maneuver quickly. Plot a course directly at them, ordered, full acceleration. Stared at him, that's suicide. No, that's misdirection, trust me. As the silent runner accelerated toward the destroyer, watched the enemy vessel's reaction. Their sensors would show a small cargo ship on what appeared to be a suicide run, exactly the kind of desperate move they'd expect from resistance fighters. They're targeting us, reported, her voice tight with fear. Good, keep us on this heading until I tell you otherwise. The destroyer's forward batteries opened fire, sending bolts of plasma toward the cargo ship, but had anticipated their firing pattern, and he guided through a series of evasive maneuvers that kept them just ahead of the enemy weapons. Now, shouted when they'd closed to 10,000 kilometers, full reverse thrust and launch missiles. His hands flew over the controls as the silent runner suddenly reversed direction, its missiles streaking toward the massive destroyer. The enemy vessel, committed to its attack run, couldn't avoid the incoming projectiles. 2 missiles struck the destroyer's engine section, their fusion warheads tearing holes in the heavily armored hull. The massive ship lurched sideways, its main engines sputtering and dying. Jump to hyperspace, ordered, now before their escort ships arrive. The silent runner vanished into hyperspace just as 3 Iron Fang cruisers dropped out of faster-than-light travel, racing to assist their damaged companion. Safe in the hyperspace tunnel, turned to stare at with something approaching awe. How did you know that would work? Because humans have been fighting larger, stronger opponents for our entire history, replied. We've gotten very good at finding ways to win fights we shouldn't be able to win. 6 hours later, They emerged from hyperspace in orbit around Prime's smallest moon. The planet below showed the scars of conquest burning cities, orbital bombardment craters, and the geometric patterns of Iron Fang military installations. "Welcome home," said bitterly. Studied the tactical situation, noting enemy positions and potential landing sites. Somewhere down there, resistance fighters were hiding in the ruins of their civilization. Waiting for someone to give T the landing site base had designated was a bombed-out industrial complex on the outskirts of what had once been Prime's capital city. Guided the silent runner through a careful descent, using the ship's sensors to avoid Iron Fang patrol routes while navigating between the twisted wreckage of orbital defense platforms. There, pointed to a cluster of collapsed factory buildings. The underground entrance is in the third structure from the left. Set the ship down in a clearing surrounded by rusted machinery and concrete rubble. Through the cockpit windows, he could see the devastation the Iron Fang had wrought on this world. Where once beautiful cities had nestled among ancient forests, now only blackened stumps and smoking ruins remained. "They're not just conquering," observed grimly. "They're trying to break your people's spirit by destroying everything beautiful." His ears pressed flat against her skull. The Crimson General calls it cultural restructuring. He believes aesthetics make species weak and sentimental. A panel in the ship's floor slid open, revealing 3 climbing up from a hidden tunnel. Recognized the lead figure immediately: Commander, a grizzled veteran who had coordinated resistance operations during the original hegemony occupation. Said in accented English, extending a clawed hand in the human gesture of greeting. "When said she was bringing a human advisor, I hoped it might be you." Clasped the offered hand, feeling the familiar roughness of battle-scarred palm. "Commander, good to see you alive." "Good to be alive," replied with a bitter smile. "Though some days I wonder if we're just postponing the inevitable." The other 2 were younger, barely past adolescence by their species standards. They stared at with a mixture of awe and skepticism, clearly uncertain whether one human could make a difference against the Iron Fang war machine. "This is and," explained. "They'll escort you to our command center. The tunnel system extends for kilometers underground. The Iron Fang haven't discovered it yet." The journey through the resistance tunnels took nearly an hour, winding through a maze of abandoned sewers, natural cave systems, and hastily dug passages. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and could smell the lingering smoke from the city above. "How many people do you have down here?" asked as they walked. "About 300 in this complex," replied. "Fighters, refugees, technical specialists, maybe 24 other installations across the planet, most smaller than this one." Did quick calculations. 3,000 resistance fighters against an occupation force of unknown size with limited weapons and supplies. The math was not encouraging. The command center occupied a natural cavern that had been expanded with mining equipment. Computer terminals lined the walls, displaying tactical information and communication feeds from resistance cells across the planet. A large holographic display in the center showed the current Iron Fang deployment, with red markers indicating enemy strongpoints and green dots marking resistance positions. "Show me what we're facing," said, studying the display. Manipulated the controls, zooming in on various sectors. The Iron Fang have approximately 15,000 ground troops on Prime, supported by air assets and orbital weapons. Their main base is here, in the ruins of our capital. Secondary installations guard the spaceports, mining facilities, and detention centers. "Detention centers?" His blood went cold. "Where they keep the females they've taken," explained grimly. "We've identified at least 6 facilities, heavily guarded. Any attempt to assault them directly would result in the deaths of the prisoners." Stepped forward, studying the holographic markers. "Have you located my sister?" His expression grew compassionate. "We believe she's being held at Facility 7 near the old university, but the security there is massive. Automated defenses, human mercenaries, and a full Iron Fang battalion." Examined the tactical display, noting the placement of enemy forces and the Resistance's limited assets. The situation was worse than he'd expected, but not hopeless. During the war, he'd planned operations against equally overwhelming odds. "What about weapons and equipment?" asked. "Limited," admitted. "We have small arms, some explosives, and basic communication gear. The Iron Fang control all the heavy weapons manufacturing. Then we'll have to take what we need from them, said. Commander, I need to speak with representatives from all the resistance cells. Can you arrange a meeting? Looked surprised. That would be extremely dangerous if the Iron Fang discovered such a gathering. They won't, said confidently. Because we're not going to meet in person, we're going to use a secure communication protocol I developed during the war. Over the next 3 days, worked with the Resistance's technical specialists to establish encrypted communication links with cells across the planet. The protocol used quantum entanglement principles to create channels that couldn't be intercepted or traced by conventional means. Slowly, the scope of the Resistance network became clear. 23 active cells, ranging from small bands of a dozen fighters to larger groups like Base. Total strength, approximately 2,800 personnel, most lightly armed and poorly coordinated. The cell leaders were a diverse group, former military officers, civilian leaders, and younger who had grown up during the war. Some were suspicious of human involvement, remembering how colonial defense force politics had abandoned their world to the Iron Fang. Others were desperately hopeful that human tactical expertise might turn the tide. The Iron Fang expect us to fight like, explained during their first joint planning session. Defensive, cautious, focused on minimizing casualties. That predictability is their biggest advantage and our opportunity. What are you suggesting? Asked Commander, leader of a mountain-based cell near the northern pole. That we become more aggressive. I'm suggesting we become more human, replied. Hit them where they don't expect it, when they don't expect it, in ways they don't expect. Make them react to us instead of the other way around. Outlined his preliminary strategy, using the holographic display to show potential targets. Instead of trying to match the Iron Fang's strength directly, they would focus on disrupting their operations and support infrastructure. Fuel depots, communication relays, supply convoys, explained. Force them to spread their forces thin, protecting everything they need to maintain their occupation. That's a lot of simultaneous operations, observed Commander Iran, whose cell operated near the capital. We've never attempted anything so coordinated. Which is exactly why it might work, pointed out. They know how resistance cells normally operate. This will be something completely different. As the planning session continued, could see the mood in the various cells shifting from despair to cautious optimism. For the first time since the invasion began, they had a plan that didn't involve merely surviving until rescue arrived. But the real test came when presented his idea for the operation's first phase. We're going to hit their main communication center, he announced, highlighting a heavily fortified installation in the heart of the Iron Fang's primary base. Take it out, and their coordination across the planet collapses. Shocked silence greeted this announcement. Finally spoke. That facility is in the center of their strongest position. It's suicide. Not if we do it right, replied. He manipulated the display, showing the base's layout and defenses. The Iron Fang think like conventional military forces. They expect attacks to come from outside their perimeter using the most direct route. They don't expect someone to walk in the front door. Outlined his plan, and the audacity of it left the resistance leaders speechless. Instead of a frontal assault, he proposed infiltrating the base using captured Iron Fang uniforms and identification. A small team would approach during shift change, when security procedures were most relaxed. The human mercenaries are our weakness and our opportunity, explained. They know how humans think, but they also create an opening for deception. One more human face won't seem suspicious. What about the rest of us? Asked. The Iron Fang know what look like. Smiled grimly. That's where the coordinated strikes come in. While we're infiltrating the communication center, every other cell hits their designated targets simultaneously. The base will be in chaos, responding to attacks from all directions. A few in Iron Fang uniforms will be the least of their concerns. Over the following week, refined the operation with input from the cell leaders. Supply routes were mapped, timing was synchronized, and backup plans were developed for every contingency he could imagine. The infiltration team would consist of, and 2 of most experienced fighters disguised as prisoners. They would use a captured Iron Fang transport to reach the base, claiming to be transferring high-value captives for interrogation. The beauty of this approach, explained during final briefings, is that it uses their expectations against them. They see prisoners being transferred by humans, they assume it's routine Iron Fang business. But knew the real challenge wouldn't be getting into the base. It would be finding and destroying the communication equipment before security forces overwhelmed them. The facility was massive, and they'd have perhaps 20 minutes from insertion to extraction. "What about my sister?" asked during a private moment. "Facility 7 isn't far from the communication center." Had been dreading this question. The mission was already complex enough without adding a rescue operation, but he could see the desperate hope in its golden eyes. "If the opportunity presents itself," said carefully, "we'll try. But the mission has to come first. If we can't knock out their communications, all the other operations will fail." Nodded reluctantly, "I understand." The night before the operation, found himself unable to sleep. He walked through the underground complex, checking equipment and reviewing plans one final time. In a few hours, 2,000 would risk their lives based on his strategy. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. Found him in the armory, examining the captured Iron Fang equipment they'd use for the infiltration. "Second thoughts?" the commander asked. "Always," replied. "Any plan that doesn't give you second thoughts isn't ambitious enough." "The young ones think you're some kind of miracle worker," observed. "They believe human tactical genius can overcome any odds." Looked up from the Iron Fang uniform he was checking. "What do you think?" Considered for a moment. "I think you're a good soldier who cares about doing the right thing. That's rarer than tactical genius and ultimately more valuable." As dawn approached, the resistance cells across Prime made their final preparations. In mountain hideouts, forest camps, and urban ruins, fighters checked weapons and synchronized chronometers. Some would not survive the day, but all would die knowing they'd struck back against the forces that had destroyed their world. Donned the Iron Fang uniform, noting how the dark material seemed to absorb light. Beside him, adjusted her disguise as a prisoner, fake restraints concealing weapons and communication devices. "Ready?" asked. His ears swiveled forward in determination. "Let's go save my world." Captured Iron Fang transport flew through the pre-dawn darkness toward the enemy's main base, its hull with battle damage that helped sell their cover story. Sat in the pilot's seat, wearing the black uniform of an Iron Fang lieutenant, while and two other huddled in the passenger compartment with fake restraints around their wrists. "Iron Fang Base Control, this is Transport 7-4 requesting landing clearance," spoke into the communication system, affecting the bored tone of a routine mission. "Transport 7-4, state your cargo and authorization," came the reply in accented English. "3 high-value prisoners for interrogation. Authorization code Delta 7799. A pause filled the channel as Base Control the stolen authorization code. Held his breath, knowing that discovery at this point would doom not only their mission, but the coordinated strikes scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. "Transport 7-4, you are cleared for landing on Pad 12. Proceed to detention processing immediately upon arrival." Allowed himself a small smile as he guided the transport toward the sprawling Iron Fang installation. The base covered several square kilometers of what had once been Prime's most beautiful city. Ancient architecture lay in ruins beneath brutal Iron Fang military structures, a stark reminder of the cultural destruction these invaders brought wherever they conquered. The landing pad was surrounded by guard towers and automated defense systems, but noted that most of the security focused outward, protecting against external attack rather than infiltration from within. It was exactly the kind of conventional thinking he'd hoped to exploit. 2 Iron Fang soldiers approached as powered down the transport's engines. To his relief, both were aliens, reptilian saurians whose natural aggression had made them popular recruits for the Iron Fang military. They would be less likely to notice subtle details that might give away his deception. "Prisoners for processing," announced as he exited the transport, adopting the swagger he'd observed in captured Iron Fang personnel. The larger saurian hissed something in his native language, then switched to broken English. "Papers, need transfer orders." Handed over forged documents that's technical team had prepared. The quality wasn't perfect, but in the dim pre-dawn light and with the guards' obvious boredom, he hoped they would pass casual inspection. While the saurians examined the paperwork, and her two companions climbed out of the transport with convincingly defeated expressions. The fake restraints looked authentic enough to satisfy a quick glance, and the three had practiced their roles as captured resistance fighters. "Communication Center?" asked the guards. "Need to report successful capture to command." The larger Saurian pointed toward a heavily fortified structure in the center of the base. "Central building, 3rd level, but first process prisoners at detention facility." Nodded, fighting the urge to check his chronometer. 26 minutes until the coordinated strikes began. They needed to be in position at the communication center by then, or the entire operation would fail. The detention facility sat adjacent to the main command building, connected by an elevated walkway that would provide perfect access to their target. As they approached the entrance, could see other prisoners being led through the processing area, most of them young females destined for the Crimson General's breeding programs. The sight made blood boil, but he forced himself to maintain the cold demeanor of an Iron Fang officer. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford until the mission was complete. Inside the detention facility, chaos reigned as processing clerks struggled to handle the constant influx of new prisoners. Approached the duty desk, where a bored-looking human in Iron Fang uniform stamped documents with mechanical precision. "3 more for processing," announced, gesturing to his fake prisoners. The clerk barely looked up. "Forms." Handed over the transfer documents, using the moment to scan the room for potential threats. Most of the facility's guards were aliens, but he spotted 2 humans near the exit mercenaries, probably former Colonial Defense Force judging by their bearing. "Cell Block 7 is full," the clerk muttered, stamping the papers. "These go to temporary holding until space opens up." Perfect. Temporary holding was located on the 3rd level of the main building, directly adjacent to the communication center. Couldn't have asked for better placement. As they made their way through the facility's corridors, suddenly stiffened beside him. Following her gaze, saw a group of young females being led toward processing. One of them, with distinctive silver-streaked fur, looked remarkably similar to. Ra whispered, her voice barely audible. Felt his heart sink. Sister was here in the detention facility, about to be processed into the Iron Fang's slave system. But they were still 20 minutes from their strike time, and any deviation from the plan could compromise everything. "Stay focused," murmured as they followed the guard toward the holding cells. "We stick to the mission." But he could see the conflict tearing at. Her sister was less than 50 meters away, probably facing a fate worse than death, while they walked past disguised as enemies. The human part of wanted to act immediately, but his military training demanded patience. The elevator to the 3rd level seemed to take forever. Checked his chronometer, 18 minutes. Around them, the base continued its routine operations, completely unaware that in less than 20 minutes, simultaneous attacks would begin across the planet. "Holding cells this way," the guard announced as they reached the 3rd level. The corridors here were wider, designed to accommodate the movement of equipment and personnel to the command sections. Through reinforced windows, could see into the communication center banks of equipment monitoring Iron Fang operations across the star system. "Wait here while I get authorization," the guard said, pointing to a waiting area outside the holding cells. As soon as the guard disappeared around a corner, activated the concealed communication device in his uniform. "All units, final status check." Response came immediately from resistance cells across the planet. "Mountain base ready, forest group in position, urban strike team standing by." One by one, 23 resistance cells confirmed their readiness. "Execute in 15 minutes, transmitted. Good hunting." Tugged on his sleeve, her eyes desperate. "I saw the processing schedule. They're transferring my sister off-planet tonight. This is our only chance." Closed his eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. The mission demanded they proceed to the communication center and wait for the coordinated strikes. But Ra would be gone forever if they didn't act now. "How certain are you that was your sister?" asked. "Completely. She has that distinctive silver streak from a childhood accident. It's definitely her." Looked at his chronometer again. 14 minutes. If they moved now, they could reach the detention level, locate Ra, and still make it back to the communication center in time. It would be cutting things extremely close, but it might be possible. "Change of plans," decided. We're going after your sister, but we do this fast and quiet. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Relief flooded features, but she maintained her composure. The three of them slipped away from the waiting area, using their knowledge of the building's layout to navigate toward the detention processing center. The facility's lower level bustled with activity as Iron Fang personnel processed new prisoners. Spotted Ra immediately. She was indeed identical to her sister, except for the silver streak in her russet fur. She stood in line with a dozen other young females, all awaiting transportation to unknown fates. Guards whispered. Four visible, probably more in the security room, replied. Studied the layout, formulating a plan. We create a distraction at the far end of the room. When the guards investigate, you grab your sister and we extract through the service corridor. What kind of distraction? Asked one of his companions. Smiled grimly, pulling a small explosive device from his uniform. The kind that makes people think the Resistance has found this place. He set a 5-minute timer on the device and planted it near a maintenance panel at the far end of the detention area. When it exploded, it would cause enough damage to trigger alarms without bringing down the building. Remember, whispered as they moved into position, we have exactly 8 minutes to get back to the communication center. After that, the real fireworks start. The explosion shook the detention center like a small earthquake, sending personnel running toward the source of the blast. In the confusion, slipped through the crowd of prisoners while and her companions created additional chaos by shouting contradictory orders. Sister whispered urgently as she reached Ra, it's time to go. Ra's eyes widened in shock and hope. How did you? Questions later, this way now. The 5 of them slipped through a service door as emergency teams rushed to contain the blast damage. Behind them, alarms wailed and Iron Fang personnel shouted orders in multiple languages. But they had achieved their objective. Ra was free. Racing through maintenance corridors, they climbed back toward the communication center. Checked his chronometer obsessively, 3 minutes until the coordinated strikes began. They were cutting it impossibly close. There, pointed as they emerged into the main corridor. The communication center's entrance stood unguarded, its personnel undoubtedly responding to the detention center emergency. Led them through the center's main doors just as his chronometer hit 0. Across the planet, 23 resistance cells simultaneously struck at Iron Fang installations. Fuel depots exploded, supply convoys came under attack, and communication relays went offline. The communication center erupted in chaos as operators tried to coordinate response to the multiple attacks. And his team moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, planting explosive charges on critical equipment while Iron Fang personnel focused on their incoming emergency calls. All systems will be down in 3 minutes, announced into his communicator. All units begin Phase 2 operations. As they prepared to evacuate the communication center, looked at the tactical displays showing Iron Fang response to the attacks. Their forces were doing exactly what he'd predicted, scattering to respond to multiple threats instead of maintaining coordinated defense. It's working, said with amazement. They're falling apart. This is just the beginning, replied. The real test comes when they try to regroup. The communication center's destruction would cripple Iron Fang coordination for hours, giving the Resistance precious time to consolidate their gains. But knew the enemy would adapt quickly once they realized the scope of the uprising. As they fought their way back through the base toward their extraction point, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The operation had achieved its primary objective, rescued Ra, and struck a devastating blow against the Iron Fang occupation. But looking at the 2 sisters reunited after months of separation, realized this was about more than military strategy. It was about giving people back their hope, their families, their future. 3 months after the coordinated strikes that crippled Iron Fang communications, the Resistance had transformed from scattered cells into a unified army. Stood in the rebuilt command center, watching holographic displays that showed liberated territories across 4 worlds. What had begun as a desperate infiltration mission had evolved into a full-scale liberation campaign. Northern continent is completely free, Commander reported, updating the tactical display. Iron Fang forces to their orbital platforms yesterday. Nodded, studying the strategic situation. The enemy's response had followed predictable patterns. When faced with coordinated resistance, they'd pulled back to defensible positions rather than risk further losses. But that withdrawal had given the breathing room to organize and equip themselves with captured Iron Fang technology. "What about the detention facilities?" asked. Stepped forward, her expression mixing satisfaction with lingering concern. 17 facilities liberated, over 3,000 prisoners freed. But intelligence suggests the Crimson General has moved his primary operations to the orbital stations. The reunion between and her sister Ra had provided more than emotional healing. It had given the Resistance crucial intelligence about Iron Fang operations. Ra possessed an eidetic memory and had carefully observed every detail of her captivity, providing the Resistance with detailed information about enemy installations and procedures. "He's planning something," Ra said, consulting notes she'd compiled from her observations. The Crimson General was obsessed with genetic research data from the university archives. He spent weeks studying reproductive cycles and genetic markers. Felt cold dread settling in his stomach. What kind of genetic research? "Creating a hybrid warrior race," Ra explained. Combining human strategic thinking with stealth and agility, he believed it would create the perfect soldier for conquering other species. "That's why he needed living subjects," added grimly. "Not just for breeding, but for experimentation." Stared at the orbital display, considering the implications. If the Crimson General was developing enhanced soldiers using genetic material, it could shift the balance of power across the entire galaxy. The technology could be replicated on other worlds, creating armies of hybrid warriors designed specifically for conquest. "We need to reach those orbital platforms," decided. "How many ships do we have?" 47 captured Iron Fang vessels plus civilian transports we've armed," replied. Against their orbital fleet, we're still outnumbered 3-1. Manipulated the display, studying the enemy positions. The Iron Fang had established a defensive perimeter around 3 massive orbital stations, protected by automated weapons platforms and patrol fleets. A direct assault would be suicidal, but had learned long ago that direct assault was rarely the best option. "What if we don't attack their strong points?" mused. "What if we make them come to us?" Over the next week, developed a strategy that relied on misdirection and the Iron Fang's own arrogance. Instead of trying to breach their orbital defenses, the Resistance would stage a series of apparent retreats, drawing enemy forces down to the planet's surface where superior numbers meant less and local knowledge provided advantages. "The Crimson General's greatest weakness is his ego," explained during a planning session with Resistance leaders. "He sees himself as a superior tactician who can't be outmaneuvered by primitive species. We're going to use that arrogance to destroy him." The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. Resistance forces would stage fake evacuations from major cities, creating the appearance of panic and collapse. When Iron Fang forces descended to capitalize on the apparent victory, they would find themselves trapped in carefully prepared kill zones. But the real target wasn't the Iron Fang ground forces, it was the Crimson General himself. Intelligence suggested he would personally oversee the final conquest of Prime, unable to resist claiming credit for crushing the Resistance. "He'll bring his command ship into low orbit to coordinate the assault," predicted. "That's when we hit him with everything we have." Ra raised a concerning point during the planning session. "What about the genetic research data? If the command ship is destroyed, we lose any chance of learning what they've discovered." Had considered this problem extensively. The genetic research represented a potential threat to the entire galaxy, but it might also hold the key to revering whatever experimentation the Iron Fang had conducted on their prisoners. "That's why we're not going to destroy the command ship," announced. "We're going to capture it." The audacity of the plan left the Resistance leaders speechless. Capturing an Iron Fang command vessel would require boarding actions against heavily defended positions, followed by hand-to-hand combat in cramped corridors against elite enemy troops. "You're talking about storming the most heavily defended ship in their fleet," pointed out. "The casualties would be enormous." "Not if we do it right," replied. "Remember, they expect us to fight they don't expect us to fight like humans." Outlined his boarding strategy, based on tactics he developed during the original war against the hegemony. Instead of trying to overwhelm the ship's defenses, small teams would infiltrate at multiple points simultaneously, creating confusion and preventing coordinated defense. The key is speed and surprise, explained. We get aboard, secure the research data, and extract before they can mount an effective counterattack. Volunteered to lead one of the boarding teams, her experience with human tactics making her invaluable for the operation. Despite concerns about risking someone so important to the Resistance, he recognized that her skills were essential for success. Besides, said with a slight smile, someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupidly heroic. The operation began at dawn, with Resistance forces staging their fake retreats across the planet. From orbit, the Iron Fang would see their enemies apparently collapsing under pressure, fleeing toward the wilderness in disorganized panic. Watch the enemy response from his position in the underground command center. Right on schedule, Iron Fang ships began descending from orbit to support ground operations. The Crimson General's command vessel, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons, took position in low orbit to coordinate the final assault. Phase 1 complete, announced to the Resistance fleet hiding on the planet's far side. Beginning Phase 2. Across Prime, the retreating Resistance forces suddenly reversed direction, emerging from concealed positions to surround isolated Iron Fang units. What had appeared to be panic revealed itself as a carefully orchestrated trap, with enemy forces caught between converging Resistance columns. The Iron Fang ground commanders called desperately for orbital support, but their communication systems had been compromised by sleeper agents among the human mercenaries. Orders went undelivered, reinforcements arrived at wrong coordinates, and confusion spread through the enemy ranks. Now ordered, activating the Resistance fleet. 47 armed vessels rose from concealment behind the planet's largest moon, accelerating toward the Iron Fang command ship at maximum velocity. The enemy vessel's crew, focused on supporting ground operations, had only moments to react before the Resistance fleet was among them. But instead of engaging in a conventional space battle, the Resistance ships began ramming attacks against the command vessel's hull, using their smaller size and superior maneuverability to avoid most defensive fire. Each impact weakened the dreadnought's armor and created breaches for boarding parties. Led the primary assault team through a hole torn in the command ship's port side, fighting through corridors that echoed with emergency alarms and the sounds of battle. Resistance fighters moved with deadly efficiency, their knowledge of Iron Fang ship designs allowing them to navigate directly toward critical systems. "Bridge is this way," called out, consulting captured technical manuals as they fought through defending troops. The Iron Fang crew fought desperately, but they were unprepared for the Resistance's tactics. Instead of trying to hold defensive positions, the boarding teams kept moving, striking at multiple targets simultaneously and preventing the enemy from mounting coordinated resistance. Reached the ship's data core just as team secured the bridge. Around him, Resistance fighters worked frantically to download the genetic research files while holding off Iron Fang counterattacks. "Got it," announced the Resistance's chief technician, a young who had learned human computer systems during the war. "All research data downloaded, plus their strategic files for the entire operation." "Bridge secured," reported over the communication system. "We have prisoners, including several senior officers." Allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he surveyed the captured command center. Through the main, he could see Iron Fang ships retreating from Prime's orbital space, their coordination shattered by the loss of their command vessel. But the real victory wasn't the tactical success. It was what they'd found in the ship's research files. The genetic experiments had been even more horrific than anyone suspected, involving not just but prisoners from dozens of species across the galaxy. The Iron Fang had been building an army of hybrid soldiers designed to conquer the entire known galaxy. "This changes everything," said as he reviewed the captured data. "This isn't just about liberating your worlds. The Iron Fang represent a threat to every free species in the galaxy." Among the prisoners taken during the boarding action was someone hadn't expected to capture, the Crimson General himself. The being behind the Iron Fang's brutal conquest proved to be a cybernetically enhanced human, his body modified with alien technology that gave him superhuman strength and intelligence. You think this victory means something? The Crimson General snarled as resistance fighters secured his cell. You've delayed the inevitable, nothing more. The galaxy belongs to the strong, and weakness like compassion will always be defeated by superior will. Studied his prisoner through the energy barrier that contained him. You're wrong about something fundamental. Compassion isn't weakness, it's what allows different species to work together. That cooperation makes us stronger than any individual could be alone. The Crimson General laughed bitterly. Cooperation? Your own species abandoned you when you needed help. Your government left this world to die rather than risk their precious political stability. Maybe, admitted, but individual humans came anyway, and that's made all the difference. 6 months later, stood in the rebuilt capital of Prime, watching address a gathering of representatives from 17 different species. The genetic research data had revealed the scope of Iron Fang operations across the galaxy, prompting a coordinated response from worlds that had previously remained neutral. The Iron Fang Collective has been broken as an organized force, announced to the assembled delegates. Their leadership is dead or captured, their technology confiscated, and their remaining forces scattered across the outer rim. The liberation of Prime had become a symbol of resistance against tyranny, inspiring other worlds to stand against oppression. Human advisors, many of them veterans-like, had joined liberation movements on dozens of planets, spreading the tactical innovations that had proven so effective against seemingly superior forces. What will you do now? Ra asked as they watched the ceremony from a balcony overlooking the rebuilt city. Considered the question carefully. The Colonial Defense Force had offered to reinstate his commission with full honors, recognizing his role in exposing and defeating a galactic threat. But the bureaucracy and politics that had prevented intervention in the first place remained unchanged. I think I'll stay here for a while, decided. Help with the reconstruction efforts, make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Joined them on the balcony, still wearing the ceremonial robes from her speech. As the newly elected leader of the Confederacy, she bore responsibility for guiding her people's recovery and ensuring their future security. There's something I need to tell you, she said too, her expression mixing gratitude with something deeper. The Confederacy Council voted to grant you honorary citizenship and a permanent position as our military advisor. Felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the alien sun setting over the rebuilt city. Honorary citizenship. Full citizenship, actually, corrected with a smile. With all rights and responsibilities if you want it. Looked out over the city where architecture blended seamlessly with human engineering principles, creating something beautiful and functional that neither species could have achieved alone. In the streets below, children of multiple species played together, while their parents rebuilt a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. I want it, said simply. As the sun set over Prime, casting golden light across the rebuilt capital, realized he had found something he'd lost during the original war, a sense of purpose that went beyond simple survival. The universe was vast and often hostile, but it was also filled with possibilities for those brave enough to fight for them. Years after the war, the Fox Girl Queen had returned to her people not as a broken refugee, but as a leader who had helped save not just her own world, but the galaxy itself. And beside her stood a human who had learned that sometimes the greatest victories came not from superior firepower, but from the simple act of keeping one's promises. Thank you, said softly, for saving us all. Smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting from his shoulders. Thank you for reminding me what was worth saving. The real war was just beginning. Him hope. Signal base, ordered. Tell them the cavalry has arrived. All right, he said finally. Let's go save your world again.